Hello and welcome. Coming up, has Boris Johnson boo-booed in calling an election? I'll ask the runner-up in the Tory leadership contest, Jeremy Hunt. Was Jeremy Corbyn wrong to support that election? I'll ask a Labour politician who's actually in office, Manchester's Mayor Andy Burnham. What unforced errors will I make tonight? Tons of them, I'm sure. Anushka Asana will keep score. And still sitting in the only parliament that matters, that's ours, a Lib Dem candidate who used to be Labour, Luciana Berger, a Brexit Party MEP who used to be UKIP, Alex Phillips, an ex-Tory minister who's quitting Parliament, Ed Vaizey, and still Labour, just Ben Bradshaw. Watcher. Now, whenever the Prime Minister opens his mouth about the election, he says he doesn't really want it, which is blooming odd, given that for weeks he's been putting down motions to call one. Perhaps what he means is that, on reflection, he doesn't really want this one, because in its first few hours, his Welsh Minister, Alan Cairns, has resigned after questions were raised about his links to a former aide accused of sabotaging a rape trial. One of Johnson's closest colleagues, Jacob Rees-Mogg, was forced to apologise for remarks widely seen as grotesquely insensitive about victims of the Grenfell tragedy. And there's been a right old hoo-ha over whether Tory HQ put out fake news in the way it edited an ITV interview with the Brexit bloke from Labour, Sir Keir Starmer. As for Jeremy Corbyn, he presumably didn't know whether to laugh or cry when told that his deputy, Tom Watson, is quitting both as his deputy and as a parliamentary candidate. The point is that Watson has been Corbyn's most troublesome internal critic over Brexit and the scourge of anti-Semitism. But it's never great for a party to see the departure of a big beast like Watson at the start of an election campaign. It's hardly a vote of confidence in Labour or its leader, whatever the public statements. So we're only a day into this election and it's bad news all round, except perhaps for Jo Swinson, the Lib Dem leader, who insists with a straight face that she could be our next Prime Minister. You're not laughing, are you, Anushka?
I'm always serious, Robert. Now, you may have noticed that over the past few years, we've had a lot of politics. Check out this rolling timeline. Since 2014, 2 referendums, 2 European elections, 3 general elections, 3 prime ministers, and a stupid number of critical votes in Parliament. But there is one thing that appears to have remained fairly constant, and that is Conservative election messaging. Let me show you. In 2015, David Cameron said it was stability and strong government with him or chaos with Ed Miliband. 2 years later, Theresa May offered strong and stable leadership versus a coalition of chaos with Jeremy Corbyn. And guess what? Today, Home Secretary Priti Patel was saying, vote Tory or get a Brexit-blocking coalition of chaos. Now, you may be forgiven for thinking that things haven't been that unchaotic over the last few years. And as you pointed out, Robert, they haven't been that calm this week for the Conservatives, with that apology from Jacob Rees-Mogg, Andrew Bridgen also having to apologise, and that resignation from the cabinet of Alan Cairns. So how bad is all of this for the Tories? Well, James Johnson, who was a pollster for Theresa May, urges caution. He says the criticism of the campaign may be merited, but he thinks it looks more like wishful thinking. He says that the fundamental likelihood at the moment remains a Tory majority. That is a stronger prediction than many are willing to make because of how much things changed in 2017. The Times' Matt Chorley is reminding us of that with his double election tracker. The dotted lines are what happened in 2017, while the solid ones are this year. And you can see that in red, Labour is on exactly the same path as it was back then. The Tories ahead of Labour, but still below where they were. And we know that gap was much smaller by election night. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. The person I'm probably most jealous of tonight is my Sky colleague, Kay Burley, because I'm feeling particularly accident-prone. So when she interviewed an empty chair for 5 minutes, I thought, well, I could have a bit of that, because much more could go wrong interviewing my big hitters. We've got Ben Bradshaw from Labour, Ed Vaizey standing down at this election, Tory, Alex Phillips from the Brexit Party, and, of course, Luciana Berger from the Lib Dems. Some really significant departures. Let's start with the most important, obviously, Ed's. You're not standing in this election. Why not?
Well, it was a personal choice. I thought about it in 2017 because normally you expect as an MP, if you sign up for an election, you win, you're signing up for 4 or 5 years, so you sort of have to think ahead. So I thought 2017, I could do another 4 or 5 years in Parliament. 2019 comes along and I think, well, another 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure.
Not exactly a great vote of confidence in Boris Johnson, is it?
It's nothing to do with Boris Johnson. In fact, you know, one of the things that I dithered and delayed, as it were, in a Corbyn-like manner, I dithered and delayed for the last week, but partly because I think Boris is going to come back with a significant majority and we're going to get back to a strong Conservative government that's going to do some things this country needs. So I would have been delighted to have been on the backbench as Boris Johnson Prime Minister, but for a personal choice for me, I think there are other things I want to do, particularly in the arts and creative industries, which are my passion, that I can't really do while I'm still an MP.
Now, obviously, not quite so important, but still very important departure we've heard about tonight is Tom Watson, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. Actually, I'm going to start with you, Luciana. Ed just made a statement that some of us always sort of, when an MP says they're standing down for personal reasons, it's got nothing to do with politics. I think some of us take it with a pinch of salt. Tom Watson, great critic of Jeremy Corbyn, but claiming that his departure has nothing to do with lack of confidence in the Labour leadership. What do you think?
Well, his statement referred to some of the differences he's had with the Labour leadership, and I think it's just another nail in the coffin for the Labour Party. I think we've seen lots of people standing down, and he, I think, just in good conscience couldn't go out on the doorstep and say, vote for me and get Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, and that's why he's taken the decision that he has.
Do you have a problem banging on doors and saying, vote for me and get Jeremy Corbyn, Ben?
No, and I think what's remarkable, I mean, I was quoting Ed as the last Tory moderate who's still standing until today. I mean,
There's one over there. There's one over there.
Yeah, we've got one in Jeremy Hunt here. So.
You know, remember what people were predicting about the Labour Party, that, Robert, that, you know, none of the moderates would stay. We've all been reselected. I have been reselected unanimously by my party. We're all staying. We're all going back. I mean, I'm sad about Tom, but I think you should take his letter at face value. He's done fantastic work on anti-obesity, anti-sugar, on public health. He thinks he can do more outside Parliament. He's a walking, living example of what happens if you get on a bike and stop eating sugar. And good luck to him. I mean, he's made a great contribution. He's helped us become the referendum party, which is something I've always wanted. Ben. And, you know, we owe him a lot because of that.
There may be some truth in what Tom is saying, actually, because when I last bumped into him, he did say if he gets off a train and walks down a train platform, people who stop him do not want to talk about Brexit. They want to talk about weight loss and sugar.
He certainly championed the sort of healthy eating cause with tremendous passion. Alex, so the big question that everybody puts to, I'm afraid, people in your party is if you want Brexit, why on earth are you running against a Tory party that is promising to deliver Brexit and making Brexit on that basis much less likely?
I do not think that they're promising to deliver Brexit. I think they're promising to deliver Theresa May's deal dusted off with some lipstick on it, which is definitely not Brexit. And I think actually...
But if you end up with, let's say, Ben's leader, Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street, the chances are you won't get Brexit ever.
OK, no, couple of things here. So, first of all, we get this every single election time. There's this almost conceited entitlement from the two main parties that they're the only people who should ever have a shot at being in government, and smaller entryist parties especially shouldn't be involved. And they're so fearful of actually opening up the political system to other voices. And it's always the vote this and you'll get this person, vote this and you'll get that person. Not vote us on the merits and what you believe in, but vote out of fear for not getting the opposition. And I think that's pretty unfortunate in a modern democracy. But look,
Luciana, I bet you agree with Alex about the sense of entitlement. Never thought that I would say that you two would be in such a... But you must also agree that the big parties have a sense of entitlement that you don't like.
I typify it in a different way, but certainly we're seeing our whole system being shaken up, and we only have to look at the British election survey to know that people are looking for something different to the Labour Party and the Conservative Party.
But can I just check what you think? Do you think there's literally no chance of the Brexit Party now standing a significant number of candidates down before...
We have given Boris weeks of opportunity to pick up the phone and say that, you know, these are extraordinary times and this is an extraordinary election. This is a general election called in the context of political deadlock over Brexit. We are the Brexit party. We want to make sure that the right form of Brexit happens, which is actually leaving all of the EU's institutions and jurisdiction of the ECJ. And there's no element of Theresa May's dusted-off deal that does that. I think the EU themselves have come out today and kind of, in a braggadly fashion, said, ha, 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 it's the same thing, which, you know, we know. And I think, look, a bit like a piece of cheese left out of the fridge, Boris was trying to ram this thing through Parliament so it couldn't be scrutinised. Now it's out in the open air. It's going to start to honk. And he's now got to run an election campaign. He's got to run an election campaign.
I was wondering where you were going with the cheese.
What
the cheese journey.
The former Foreign Secretary, I don't know whether and candidate to be Tory leader was only pipped at the post by Boris Johnson. I don't know whether we should start with honking cheese. I don't think we will start with honking cheese, actually, but we might come back to it. One of the most striking things that you said in the summer when you were running to be Tory leader and Prime Minister was that you thought it would be an absolute catastrophe to have an election before Brexit is actually delivered. Well, that is what's happening. So is it going to be a catastrophe?
Well, I said there were risks, and there
I think you
are...
put it slightly stronger than that.
I said we have to recognise for the Conservative Party there are risks in having an election before we've left the European Union, and there are risks. But I also said I thought it would be a challenge to get a deal that removed the backstop before the 31st of October. And Boris actually confounded expectations by getting that deal. And that's where I'm afraid I think Alex is wrong, persuasive though she is, to say this is just Theresa May's deal, because the big issue with
95%.
Theresa May's deal was the backstop that many people thought, I also feared, would trap us in the EU's customs union, make it impractical in reality to leave it. And we
But can I ask you on that, what he has done in getting rid of the backstop is he has agreed an arrangement which Northern Ireland's DUP detests. Would you have done that?
Well, I don't think I would have done everything, of course, the same as Boris. We're very different characters. But the basic principle behind what he's done is to find a deal that recognises that Northern Ireland is different by dint of its history, but that it should get the same benefits from Brexit as the rest of the United Kingdom.
Is the DUP wrong that a wedge is being driven between Northern Ireland and Great Britain?
I think they are wrong, because I think for Northern Ireland to be successfully part of the United Kingdom, we also have to recognise that very distinct history, which means that a big part of the community in Northern Ireland want to have that frictionless border, and therefore we need to make the compromises that make that possible.
Now, we are into this election, and it does look pretty chaotic, the Tory approach so far.
Well, I think this is actually very typical for a general election. The first few days have been dominated by incidents which will have absolutely no bearing on how people vote when it comes to polling day. And
the resignation of a cabinet minister on day one, I don't think any of us can remember anything quite like that happening.
Well, we've had, very unfortunate resignation. We've had comments by Jacob Rees-Mogg, which he's apologised for. We've also had problems on the Labour side because, a candidate's been accused of using racist language and saying they want Netanyahu and Blair dead. This is what happens in election campaigns. I don't seek to defend any of those comments, but what I would say is the real issue in this election is that we have someone who could quite possibly become Prime Minister who does actually have extremist views. And today we had Jack Straw, a former Labour Foreign Secretary, saying that our allies would not share intelligence with us if Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister. We had Lord West, who was a Labour Defence Minister, who was also saying that Jeremy Corbyn didn't understand the principle of deterrence. And someone like Jeremy Corbyn would decimate our reputation internationally. And
that is a worry, Ben, though, isn't it?
No, I mean, for Jeremy to say that in the week when the government has covered up the official report into Russian interference in this country because of Russian funding for the Tory party, to accuse Jeremy Corbyn of being a threat to national security.
But you take what Jack Straw says seriously.
No, I think Jack's wrong on this. I mean, our Five Eyes allies are really worried about Dominic Cummings' role in Number 10, the unanswered questions about his time in Russia. This is the security arrangement we have with our 5 most important NATO allies. Why hasn't the government published that report?
That isn't
What have you
just
got
our
to hide?
Five Eyes allies, is it, Ben? Actually, the fact is the Five Eyes allies are sharing intelligence now, but many of them are saying they wouldn't share intelligence if Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister. And Lord West, who was Defence Minister under Gordon Brown, he said today Jeremy Corbyn doesn't understand the principle of
Why haven't you
deterrence. Now,
published
that's a
that
pretty
Russian
important thing.
report?
If you're a
And
Prime
what are you
Minister
afraid of? What
and
are
you've
you
got
afraid
your responsibility for our nuclear deterrent, then that is something people have got to have confidence that you would know the situation that you're going to use or not.
But Ben does raise an important point. I mean, Dominic Grieve, who, you know, you worked alongside for quite a long time, and I don't think anybody would accuse him of a sort of lack of scruples. He is the chairman of the Security Committee, and he has said that the government has had quite long enough to vet this Russian report, and he doesn't understand why it's not been published.
Well, all I can say is, you know, when I was Foreign Secretary, you're privy to all sorts of intelligence secrets, and there may well be reasons that none of us know about why that decision has been taken. I just don't know the answer to that question. But I think the substantive issue here is that for the first time for a very long time, there's someone who is on the cusp of going into Downing Street who could be a real danger to national security. And that is something that I think is going to give people pause for thought.
So, look, these are important issues which you are, you know, covering in a measured way. But the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, today in The Telegraph said that Labour activists were behaving like Stalin's henchmen and in the way that Stalin's henchmen massacred kulaks, peasants. I mean, that's just not a sensible use of language by a Prime Minister, is it?
Well, I think if you said Boris has used language in a colourful way, this would hardly be a news story for the passenger. But of course, you know, he exaggerates and he uses language that I wouldn't use, and that is Boris. But the point is, he is standing as someone who is essentially a centre-ground Conservative politician who wants to deliver Brexit. And I can hear Ben's laughter. Hang on, let's just...
Given we're all worried about the degradation of political discourse in this country, was that an appropriate analogy for the Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, are we going to disappear down rabbit holes talking about, you know, whether or not a video is a fake video or whether the language is appropriate? Or are we going to talk about the substantial issues that the country faces? And I do think it is a legitimate issue to say that Corbyn is clearly an intelligence risk and an extremist, and he shouldn't be Prime Minister. And I do agree with Jeremy, I'm afraid, and I'm leaving politics. I've got no interest in saying this particularly, that Boris Johnson is a centre Liberal Conservative. I said a lot to annoy the ERG in our party, the hard right in our party, that basically Boris, if you put Brexit in a box, is continuity Cameron.
So why are all the moderates like you leaving?
If we move on...
I've just explained... Why does Philip Hammond have no place in the Tory party anymore?
Philip and Boris got into a standoff. That is a particular issue. But
with Ben shaking his head, means we've got much more to talk about. With just a couple of minutes. Don't go away. The former Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, will still be with me, and I think there's going to be quite a lot to discuss.
Hi, welcome to The Break, #Peston. I'm joined by the former Foreign Secretary, the former Health Secretary, but we're going to be talking about your other job as a qualified referee. Indeed. Who knew? So you need 2 things for this. Oh, not that, Rory, not that. Look at it.
There we are, my goodness me, I've never looked so dashing. Thank you, Anushka.
Here you go.
Right, OK.
Stick that around your neck. Now, if you want to, you can whistle at each of these moments. So really, we're looking for you to tell us, are things foul play or are they OK? Here we go. Tories edit Keir Starmer interview to make it look like he doesn't answer a question when he really did. Foul play? Play on.
Play on.
Well, you think that was all right?
Yeah, this is social media. This
You
sort
think
of
it's
stuff.
OK to edit something to be misleading?
I could show you 1,000 Labour videos that were equally misleading as that. This is what happens on social media. Play on.
Apparently that's OK. You're getting booed. Right, here we go. Lib Dem campaign leaflets. You saw this one? The question, which was put to Jo Swenson on this, was actually not quite who do you vote for. Imagine that the result in your constituency was expected to be very close between the Conservatives and Lib Dem candidates, and none of the other parties were competitive. In this scenario, which one would you vote for?
Well,
Offside or good goal?
It's offside. I'm going to blow the whistle because
Yay!
I'm against the Lib Dems in my constituency, and we see those graphs the whole time.
You never do anything like that, do you?
We would never do anything like that. Quite right. I think I've done
Apart
some
from
graphs
editing
myself.
videos,
yes.
dodgy. Dominic Cummings' playbook. People versus Parliament, tough language. Red card, good tackle.
Look, I think I'm 50-50 on this. I think that narrative is how a lot of people view politics right now, but there are a lot of people in a different situation.
So
we have to speak to
if you
everyone.
went to VAR, what do you think the decision would be?
I think they would say this is politics. They'd say this is. I don't think they'd say it's a red card or a good tackle. They would just say this is politics.
Bit dirty, but get away with it.
Very, very focused.
OK, One Nation conservatism. Number of your colleagues on your side of the party walking away right now. Is it match abandon for One Nation conservatism, or is it game on?
It is game on. People like Amber, I'm very sorry to see leaving Parliament, are leaving principally because they don't like Brexit. Amber's been very open about.
Not because she doesn't like Boris Johnson.
But,
She definitely likes Boris Johnson.
There's a bit of a history in that relationship, but I think she basically is someone who doesn't like Brexit.
OK, I've got to be
but
quick.
we are a One Nation party.
November, full-time or extra time? Extra time is, would you ever do it? Would you grow a moustache for Movember?
I would not. I think I'm ugly enough as it is.
Not even for men's mental health?
It's not really me, I'm afraid.
Bye, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
I'll give you the whistle back.
Welcome back. There'll be much more from the former Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, in just a moment or two. But first, here's Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. Now, we often talk about this election as a Brexit election, and it is actually true that right now, in polls, the EU comes up as the most important issue facing Britain. Let me show you a graph that looks at Tory, Labour and Lib Dem supporters. Obviously, we're interested in other parties too, but this is the data we've got. It shows that especially for the Conservatives and Lib Dems, but also for Labour, Brexit is top. But in clear second place is the NHS and health. Now, this was done in late autumn, and we know that worries about the health service always spike in the winter months as resources get stretched, something that our guest Jeremy Hunt knows very well. And according to the chair of the British Medical Association, he says that we are headed for an unprecedented crisis this year. Robert.
That's Anushka. Now, I'm right to think were you the longest-serving Health Secretary ever?
I was, yes, 5.5 years.
So this is stuff you know about. A number of candidates in this election are concerned that the election could be dominated by concerns about the NHS if, for example, there's a flu epidemic. How big a risk is that for the Tory party?
Well, there's always a risk at this time of year of things going wrong in the NHS. It has to be said it normally starts after Christmas, but the cold weather typically means that someone over the age of 80 will have about an 80% chance of being admitted to hospital if they end up in an A&E, and that puts enormous pressure on hospitals. But I think the NHS is going to be talked about whether or not there are pressures on the front line, because I think Boris Johnson wants to talk about it as an example of his.
But do you think Boris
his
Johnson
centre-ground
would be
conservatism.
blamed? Do you think he would be blamed if, there is a bed crisis?
Well, I think the central issue with the NHS is that it does need more resources, and I negotiated some extra resources, and Boris Johnson has put in even more resources. But ultimately, the only thing that's going to relieve pressure is more doctors and nurses. And it takes 7 years to train a doctor and 3 years to train a nurse. And so it does take time for that money to feed into the extra bodies who are actually able to relieve the pressure. So I think the pressure is going to be with us for a while in the NHS.
Now, here's your simple question. How many new hospitals are being built?
Well, I think what the commitment has been made that there will be 6 built and another 40 in the pipeline.
So Boris Johnson is slightly playing fast and loose when he keeps mentioning that 40 figure.
No, I think he's very serious about finding the resources, but my experience, it takes 5, 6, 7, 8 years to build a hospital. It comes in stages, so you can easily start the process. And I think once you've made a commitment that you're going to give somewhere a new hospital, you really have to deliver that hospital, because there's a lot of expectation around it. So I think those hospitals will be built, and they need to be.
Now, there's been a lot of attention focused on Labour's claim that under the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, if he does a trade deal with America, he'll let American drug companies somehow force up the prices paid by the NHS by, well, I mean, they say £50 billion. Although many people have said, well, that's, scaremongering, nonetheless, it's inconceivable that Boris Johnson could do a deal that would essentially keep US drug companies out of our market.
Well, it is absolute nonsense. I mean, US drug companies are in our market. We buy a lot of medicines from them, and they buy a lot of medicines from us. The NHS is the largest purchaser of drugs in the world, and it gets the best prices. And it gets those prices on a commercial basis because it buys more drugs than anyone else. And President Trump himself has said that the NHS is not going to be part of trade talks. But I think the interesting thing about this election is that Boris Johnson also wants to talk about the NHS. When I was Health Secretary, Theresa May in the 2017 election didn't particularly want to talk about health. David Cameron didn't particularly want to talk about it.
It wasn't quite clear what she wanted to talk about in the 2017 election.
It wasn't really health, but this time Boris does, because what he is saying is that he is the kind of Conservative who is going to invest in public services in a big way, not just the health service, but schools, police officers, and actually, quite unexpected things. I don't think anyone would have predicted that he would have announced yesterday an end to the benefits freeze. And what he's saying is that he is a centre-ground Conservative, colourful, controversial. He uses language that people don't like from time to time, but this is someone who fundamentally wants to invest in the public services that matter to people.
Well, there's a couple of points of that. I mean, one is that anti-poverty groups say that although he's announced the end of the freeze, nonetheless, he's not proposing to raise benefits by nearly enough if he really wants to tackle a very serious poverty problem.
But this is very symbolically important because we have had 9 years of austerity following the financial crisis, which you, of course, reported so much on. And now we're putting that behind us. People are saying, what are the priorities and what are the values of a Conservative government? And we've chosen to do something that it would not be probably the top priority of many Conservative voters, to remove the freeze on benefits. It wasn't something lots of people were calling for, but we're doing it because it's the right thing and we believe in social justice, and we are a centre-ground Conservative government in terms of what we do.
It's certainly clear that he's trying to create the impression that austerity is over, but there is a bit of a battle going on at the top of the party about quite how much to spend, because there is a view that if you let borrowing rip, then in a sense you're underwriting Labour's approach, and Labour will always outspend you. But the idea that somehow, they're desperately imprudent, actually that gets somewhat undermined.
Well, it is certainly true that Labour will always outspend the Conservatives.
Well, that's quite appealing to many voters.
But what we're talking about this time is a Labour government that is going to add 10% to the debt of every single household as constituted in the national debt. is
But
going
there-
to
but
add
is- but it
a
is-
huge amount
but
to...
it's-
I mean, look at the 4-day week, Robert. This is a very important point. That alone will add £17 billion to the costs of public services in this country, a huge increase in
Just to be clear,
taxation
given that they've
and borrowing.
said they've not given a timetable for introducing it, and they've said they would do it in partnership with, industry, I think you've got to be slightly careful just to throw numbers
But it
around.
doesn't make it any the less expensive. And my point is that one of the reasons the financial crisis was so much worse for this country in 2008 than for other countries was because we had lost control of
But we
spending.
still don't. I mean, one of
And
the
we
things
don't
that
wanna make
people
that mistake
associate.
again.
But one of the things that people associate your party with, and certainly among your supporters, is that you take a responsible attitude to borrowing. We still don't know what your borrowing rules will be.
Well, I'm sure we'll be saying more about that, but the key point is we don't want to sacrifice the hard-earned gains we've made over the last 9 years, and the big benefit of that very, very difficult series of decisions that, Ed, who was in government with me, we had to do very painful cuts in DCMS when we worked in that department. The big benefit of that is that we are able now to spend more money on the health service, on schools and on police. We don't want to sacrifice that, but we also want to show people that your priorities are our priorities, and now we can afford to do that. That's what we're going to do.
Now, you say you're very, very comfortable with the direction that Boris Johnson is taking your party. Does that mean if the Tories win, and I think you've accepted it is an if, would you like to go back into cabinet?
Not straight away. I'm very happy on the backbenches. I'm being a good dad. I walked my son to school this morning. I've forgotten how lovely it is to... the thing is, when you're a cabinet minister, you think you're being a wonderful dad, but you're actually kidding yourself. When you start to properly do things with your kids, you realise there's another world. So I'm happy doing that for a while.
And if, however, you got the invitation to go back, what would be? You can't be leader in the short term, apparently, unless Boris Johnson loses this election, which is, I suppose, not inconceivable. But if the leadership is closed, what job would you like?
Well, right now I'm not looking for a job. I'd like to spend a bit of time with my kids. In that leadership campaign, I realised that I had been a cabinet minister for every hour that each of my 3 kids had been alive. And I just thought, actually, I want them to see a different sort of dad for a few years. So I'm very happy doing what I'm doing.
I must say, it's lovely to see you again. Can I just bring in my distinguished friends over here? Do you think, any of you can pick this up, that this is all going to be about Brexit? Because particularly this time of year, I do think the NHS could become a really huge issue in the coming weeks.
Well, absolutely, massively. And listening very closely to what Jeremy said, we have a crisis in social care, we have a crisis in mental health, we have a crisis in recruitment in our NHS. It's been cut down to the bone. We have cuts for the prevention, and we're seeing a massive increase in our health inequalities in this country. For the first time ever, life expectancy has dropped. It's no surprise we need to put something in so it doesn't topple over. The idea that we can trust the Conservatives with the NHS is, frankly, a bit of a joke.
It will be about lots of other topics apart from Brexit, but it will fundamentally also come down to leadership. I think Boris Johnson will pull ahead. But of course, we saw in the 2017 election, it became about a whole debate about social care, which completely derailed the Conservative election campaign.
And can I correct something that Jeremy said about there being no danger to the NHS from Trump and a trade deal if Brexit happens? I mean, Luciana and I are on the Health Committee. We had the example of Orkambi, the drug by Vertex, which they were trying to sell at a ridiculous price to the NHS. Trump has made no secret of the fact that he really resents the fact that the NHS in particular, but Europe in general, can drive down drug prices for American drug companies. He wants to change that, and he will make sure that happens in any trade deal.
Well, he can't, but he can't force a British government to pay higher prices. And as Jeremy pointed out, the NHS is, it's the biggest drug purchaser in the world. It's got enormous purchasing power.
But then we get no trade deal, Robert. I mean, that's the point. I mean, they're a much bigger, more powerful country than we are. We'll be on our own trying to negotiate a trade deal with Trump. The very first thing he's going to ask for, apart from his hormone-treated beef and chlorine-washed chicken access to our markets, is much, much more expensive, higher prices for American drugs.
I think that's what we call an interesting and important but debatable point. I can come back to you with much more on all of this in just a minute or two, but I'm delighted now to be joined by the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Hello, Andy, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, can hear you now, Robert. Evening.
Good to see you. Thank you for standing out in the Manchester or the Cheshire rain for us. It's very generous of you.
Well, it might even be sleet or snow, Robert. So I'm really getting the feel for this winter election standing here, I can assure you.
Now, you were in, government with Tom Watson. You've known him for ages. How big a blow to your party is his departure?
Yeah, he is a loss, no doubt about it, because Tom knows a lot about elections. You know, he's a formidable campaigning force, so there's no getting away from it. But, you know, I think people of our generation, and I count myself in this, you know, there comes a time where you've got to say, well, there is life beyond Westminster, and I fully understand why, you know, Tom has reached that point. I don't think people should read too much into the politics. I've seen the amicable exchange of letters between Jeremy and Tom, and I think, to be honest, none of us are bigger than the party. You know, we move on, and there's a new generation of talent coming through, as we can see in the shadow cabinet and in the rest of the Labour Party. So a loss, definitely. A big character, Tom, but the Labour Party has plenty of talent coming through.
Now, I've just been talking to Jeremy Hunt, who concedes that for his party, Boris Johnson's decision to have an election brings risks, but it's also pretty risky for your party, isn't it? Do you think Jeremy Corbyn made the right decision to back the election, go for an election?
I think so, Robert. He was right to get no deal off the table, but when that had happened, I think he was also right to say, yeah, bring it on. And the early exchanges would suggest that that was the right call by Jeremy Corbyn, because he's had a strong start compared to the Conservatives. You know, it would appear that Boris Johnson's made the same mistake as Theresa May, and that is to underestimate Jeremy Corbyn. And I speak as somebody who also lost to him, and I would say you don't want to do that, because he knows how to campaign. But also, there's an echo of Theresa May in that Boris seems to have stumbled into the campaign without a proper plan. It would just seem that he wants to get through on a slogan or two, and that does remind us, doesn't it, of 2017. So it feels like the Conservatives are making the same mistakes all over again. And, you know, the issue really now is who's going to put substance behind the slogans. And tonight we're saying, you know, the North-South divide needs to be a big issue in this election, as well as the Remain-Leave divide. And, you know, all the newspapers of the North are coming behind that call tonight in quite an unprecedented intervention into a British election. The North of England collectively, across the parties, is saying who is going to stand up for the North and who is going to deliver on the promises to the North. And that is a challenge that goes to all of the political parties.
I think we can actually show some of these front pages as I understand it. And as you say, it is pretty extraordinary seeing all these newspapers in your part of the world bigging up your so-called manifesto for the North, a copy of which I've got in front of me, which you're launching. Is this a Labour manifesto?
No, absolutely not, Robert. This was the product of the Convention of the North, which drew people from politics, business, faith and civic groups, and the Prime Minister attended as well. So this is very much a shared manifesto across geographies and the politics of the North. And it's a big intervention in a British general election. We've never seen anything like this before. An entire English region saying, look, this has to be a change election for the North of England. The North-South divide has never been a proper issue at a general election, and we're saying it needs to be one now, particularly when you have a former head of the UK Civil Service, Lord Bob Kerslake, saying that England is as divided now as East and West Germany were in the early 1990s after reunification. That is a massive statement, and that requires a proper response from the political parties as to how they are going to close it.
I mean, overnight, you're probably aware of this, John McDonnell is making an announcement about an enormous pledge of funding for projects and infrastructure in the North, and he's also promising a massive shift of power to the North. Do you have any sense, however, that the Tory party is going to go any way to meeting your demands?
Well, it's certainly encouraging to hear what John McDonnell is planning to say, because, yes, it is about investment in infrastructure, but this isn't just, you know, a whinge about resources. The North is saying, look, give us the powers now, give us control of our own destiny. Westminster has created this North-South divide. You know, we can't carry on with that dysfunctional Parliament that we saw before the election. holding us back on so many key issues. So it's really welcome that we're talking about investment and powers. And yeah, there have been promises from the Conservatives too. So let's see what both of the main parties now are going to say about this issue. You know, we are talking a lot about Remain Leave, but the North-South divide is a bigger divide that goes back many, many generations, and it's time that it was now fixed. People across the North are saying, you know, we've never had the focus that we deserve, and we now demand that that's put right.
I mean, just to be clear, since you've been mayor, what have your relations been like with the governments of Theresa May and now Boris Johnson?
Perfectly workable and cordial at times. Certainly worked well with Theresa May in the aftermath of the Manchester Arena attack, and was grateful for her support in that moment. But I think it's fair to say that the devolution agenda lost pace and purpose under Theresa May and Philip Hammond, and it seems to have regained some of that with the new Prime Minister and his cabinet. So, you know, of course, as Mayor of Greater Manchester, it's my job not just to do the point scoring, but to work with all parties to get the best deal that I possibly can for Greater Manchester and the wider north of England. And that is what I'm trying to do. And I am making it very clear tonight. You know, elections where we just focus on marginal seats and promise things to voters there, that isn't good enough anymore. You know, we've got this north-south divide, which has kind of held our country back for decades. And the party that puts most substance behind promises to the north, I think, will be the party that deserves to win here.
So we're almost out of time, and so one final very quick question. I think it's a first for this programme. We've got two former health secretaries on the programme. How big a risk did Johnson take in having an election at a time when there could easily be a bit of a health crisis?
No, I think it is a significant risk, because the pressure on the NHS is there for all to see. You know, we're working hard here in Greater Manchester to ensure that A&E can cope through the coming months. But there's no doubt about it, like other public services, the NHS is really struggling now. And actually, I would say it's those cuts to councils. Councils have been cut to the bone. And because of that, they can't support people to get out of hospital with decent social care. And that is coming home to roost. And I would say again to all of the parties, you can't keep cutting councils in this way and not seeing the loss of social care put pressure on the NHS. And you know, we've waited long enough, Robert, haven't we, for a funding solution for social care. So alongside that old challenge of the North-South divide, I think we also need to see this election produce a proper, sustainable solution for the funding of social care.
I think there's a lot of agreement on this whole issue of needing to solve it, although a lot of disagreement about how we solve social care. Good to see you as always, Andy. Thanks for being with us. Don't go away. We've got tons more to talk about after the break.
Hello and welcome to the break. Hashtag Peston. We are, with all our friends, going to be continuing what we have started last week, which is time to make predictions. Can't remember which one it is. There we go. So this is what happened last week. You can see the predictions of our guests, and also there's two people in the box of shame because they failed to make a proper prediction. I think Chuka Amuna said that it would be a hung parliament, but not who would be the biggest party. Now, I'll pull on to you. I'll do my bank. So I'm going to start with Jeremy Hunt. He said it would be a Tory majority of 8. OK, so he is in there. We're waiting for Andy Burnham.
Well, he's not getting a job.
In the box yet. Huh?
He's not getting a job.
Not with that prediction. Depends if they're watching this on Twitter. Luciana, what is your prediction?
Oh.
You can say, so T is Tory majority and number, L Labour majority in number,
LD.
LD if you want a
Labour,
Lib Dem majority in number, or H for hung parliament. And then you have to tell us who's the biggest party.
Goodness. I'd also say H, but in terms of like putting a number on it.
OK. Oh, no, you're going to go up in there.
Oh, goodness. Come back to me. I'll
Let's
go.
see with Lib Dems and hung and boxes of shame. Ben?
Labour majority of 10.
OK.
Gosh.
Labour majority of 10. There we go. Alex. Oh, sorry.
No, Alex.
Oh, I'm going to go hung parliament.
Hung.
I do think the Tories are probably going to sort of squeak a semi-majority, but not really enough to organise anything
so
sensible.
Tories
And they're
are the
gonna lose
biggest
their-
party,
They're
and
going to
how
lose their
short are
friends
they?
in the. They're going to lose their friends in the DUPs.
I think.
I don't think
sure?
much is going to -10.
Minus 10. Right, Ed?
Can you give Alex a separate side bet of how many Brexit MPs are going to be?
Yeah.
How many?
10. There you are, and
Okay.
then we're going to have to prop you up.
OK.
Well, not you, because you're not going to be there.
Ed?
T30.
T30. Very bold.
Do you need to go to the dentist?
Oh, I have to start to rap. Come on.
Uh,
Can't do
Just
it.
put H.
Oh, my goodness.
H. Put H.
Yeah.
OK, you get an H, but
Yeah.
that still puts you in there, because that's what
Put
also
H
what
and-
Checker Romano did. Oh,
Lib
thank
Dem's
you.
largest party.
Yeah, but was that an option? Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
What?
How would a
Dem's
Lib
largest.
largest-
OK, there you go.
Welcome back. It's amazing I'm still here, given how incoherent I've been so far, but here's Anushka.
Don't say that, Robert. Now, look, I think we all know that this election is going to be complicated, but I've got some great geekery for you from Oxford researcher Leonardo Carella. To try and understand some of the forces in play in 2019, he decided to look at this election through the prism of Remain versus Leave. Now, obviously, this is a simplification, but it's useful for looking at trends. What Carella did is he lined up the parties in voting blocks, the Tories and Brexit Party on the Leave side, and then those offering a referendum or to stop Brexit, Labour, the Lib Dems, Plaid, SNP, Greens on the Remain side. And what you can immediately see is that the Remain side is much more divided than the Leave one. Labour has been more squeezed by these parties than the Conservatives have been. So clearly, that is a big advantage to Boris Johnson. But what Carella has also shown is a big risk for the Prime Minister. He's looked at this year's European elections and tracked where the votes for different parties came from. Now, this is going to look complicated, but let me explain it to you, because I think I can, hopefully. So look, over here, we've got the Brexit Party vote and the Conservative Party vote. And what this shows is that they are positively correlated. The line goes up. Where one of the parties is strong, so is the other one. But the Lib Dem and the Labour vote is negatively correlated. Their votes are stronger in different areas. And that becomes even more pronounced when you add in the SNP. What this means is that even if Labour is squeezed, the overall Remain threat could be a problem for Johnson in large parts of the country. But, look, I said it was simplified because, in reality, a minority of Remainers will vote Tory. And Carella says that early polls indicate Johnson is doing a better job of hanging on to Tory Remainers than Labour is doing so far with its Leave vote. For all of this, Leonardo Carella is our Geek of the Week. The badge is in the post. Robert.
Thanks so much, Anushka. Now, I think that analysis is extremely interesting. I'm sort of pick up, actually, Ed, with the last point that Anushka made, and actually it's one that a number of your other colleagues have made, which is that Tory Remainers are more loyal to the Tory party than they are to their Remain cause. Do you think that is correct?
I think on the whole it is correct. I think one has to acknowledge that there will be Tory Remainers who will move, and if they do move, they will probably move to the Lib Dems, certainly in the south where there are Lib Dem presence. So you will see a big... That is why I think the Lib Dems might pick up votes in London, for example. But I also think that, to a certain extent, it's interesting, isn't it, what Jeremy said about the risk of going to election without getting Brexit done. Weirdly, I think I'm now thinking the opposite, that mainly because Boris came back with a deal just before the election, he can go and say this is the Brexit deal. So I think that weirdly could turn into a strength for him. And then you've got Tory Remainers who are a bit like me, who say we don't like Brexit, but we accept the result of the referendum. And would we prefer a Conservative government or a Corbyn government?
So you're definitely voting Tory?
That's a no-brainer. I'm voting Tory.
Alex.
I think.
That's the clip we're going to use. Alex, if I could just take you back to the beginning of the programme. Just to be absolutely clear, what that research indicates is that actually you do have the power to keep Boris Johnson out of Downing Street.
Or keep
and that
him
really
in.
that really doesn't worry you.
Or keep him in, actually, and we've given him that option. But look, we know we also attract a lot of votes from the Labour Party. I think this is why the general election is going to have to come down to a constituency-by-constituency basis, because fundamentally you've got 5 million leavers in the Labour Party, and especially in those Labour heartlands in the North West, in Wales, it's very difficult for the Conservatives to win there traditionally, and a lot of people now identify first as a Leaver or Remainer before party allegiance. And so we damage a lot of the parties.
Can I ask you about that, Ben? Do you think that if a Leave supporter who's formally voted Labour is thinking they can't vote for Labour in this election, do you think they are more likely to be attracted by the Brexit Party or the Tory Party?
I don't think it makes very much difference. I think they'll be much more resilient in their Labour support than people give them credit for, because they actually care much more about other issues other than Brexit, social issues, living standards, secure jobs and so forth, the growing inequality. They really want real change in this country, which is what Labour is offering. And I think you'll see a Remain surge in this election, so a maximum number of Labour MPs and other Remain MPs elected, and I hope that's what happens.
So you, just to be clear, you don't think the Brexit Party poses much of a threat to you in the northeast?
I don't think it makes any difference at all. I think people are going to be voting on all sorts of issues, and those very small number, actually, of Labour voters who voted Leave, the vast majority of Labour voters are Remainers.
To be clear, that's not really what the polls are currently saying, but you think the polls are just wrong on this?
They care much more about the bread and butter issues in their lives, like the health service, like growing inequality.
But as we saw earlier in the programme, that's actually not what the polling shows. The polling shows that Brexit is still by far the #1 issue for most voters.
But you're making the false assumption that Labour voters in these seats are majority Leave. Then in almost every constituency in the country, most Labour voters voted Remain.
Lucian, I've got to bring you in.
Well, I mean, I can only reflect on my experience just this morning on the doorstep, where I was joined by people that had been both members of the Labour Party and members of the Conservative Party, have now come over to join the Liberal Democrats, because the greatest issue facing our country at the moment is Brexit. And actually you find people that find themselves in parties which were traditionally, we fought our politics on the left-right axis. Now it's whether we do Leave or Remain.
Can I take you back to
Anushka's?
But what it actually shows is there is a realistic prospect of the Liberal Democrats and Labour actually ending up combined with most seats. And it's not really helpful to your cause that Jo Simpson keeps saying she would not allow Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister.
I think she's been very clear, and she said she won't put either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn into number 10, because it's right that the country has a proper choice at this election.
No, obviously you want people to vote Lib Dem, but realistically, after the election, you will have to make a choice. Many people think.
Well, let's be very clear. Jeremy Corbyn is not someone that's supported.
Oh, I've been told we're out of time, sadly. By next week, we may have an inkling of the party's manifestos, what they may be saying. Join us here to find out what that means, if they're worth anything. See you soon.